You can learn a lot about a person by playing tennis with them. As a general rule, I have found that guys who are gentlemen on the tennis court are gentlemen in off-court life as well. Conversely, I watched one guy display the worst athleticism I've ever seen while playing with his best friend. Later, I wasn't surprised when this guy abandoned his family and ran off with another man's wife. And then there's Frank Calhoun. Frank is a big guy, and he played soccer at Georgia Tech until he hurt his knee. After an orthopedic surgeon repaired it, Frank switched to tennis. But he plays tennis like a soccer player, powerful serves and backhand shots to the net, but I can beat him. I like to go to the net and put pressure on him to get it past me. More often than not, he overdoes it and the ball bounces off the backhand line. And don't get me started on his rounds. Let's just say that when he picks a line, he always prefers it to be in his favor. As a result, Frank always wants to play me. He just can't lose to the little guy. I'm not small, I'm 6 feet tall, but I'm quite lean and wiry, which makes me small compared to Frank, who is 3 inches taller and 75 pounds heavier than me. Not surprisingly, I don't feel much like playing with Frank, but it's hard to avoid since we both live in the Eden Point neighborhood north of Atlanta. Since Atlanta is a big tennis city, our neighborhood was built around a clubhouse with a pool and lots of tennis courts. Since so many people play on Atlanta Lawn Tennis Association league teams, it's pretty hard to avoid someone like Frank. But the good news is that I play with a lot of very nice people, like my mixed doubles partner Penny Pennington. I met Penny thanks to my wife Melanie. Melanie is a Pilates instructor, and many people who live in Eden Point take classes at her studio, including Penny. Unfortunately for me, Melanie is not into tennis, but when she heard that Penny was looking for a partner, she introduced me to her, and for about a year now, Penny and I have been playing together. The club we were playing in today's match was in Stone Mountain, so I offered to drive Penny to save gas. Considering how traffic accumulates on Saturday afternoons, we allotted ourselves 45 minutes to get there. As she pulled out of the driveway, I wondered once again why Penny was still single. Part of the reason was that she had lost her husband in a car accident 3 years ago. After a long period of mourning, one way of coping with grief was to attend Melanie's Pilates class. Another way was to get back into tennis, which she had practiced back in high school. The result of all this physical activity was a trim, slender, dark-haired woman in her 30s. I expected a woman as beautiful as Penny to attract suitors like flies to honey, but she kept telling Melanie that she just hadn't found the right man. "Hey, Penny," I greeted her as she opened my car door. "Are you ready to get them today?" She grinned. "I'm very ready, Michael. I've wanted a rematch with these guys for a long time." We were discussing our strategy for the match as I pulled onto the I-285 freeway, but I was interrupted by my cell phone ringing. "Hey, Robert. You've got to be kidding me. No, everything's great here. Shit. Okay, we'll reschedule for another day." Penny gave me a perplexed look as I turned onto yet another exit ramp and headed home. "That was our rival," I told her. "He told me it had just rained and the courts weren't playable." Atlanta is notorious for isolated downpours that can flood one area of the city while just a few miles away, the sun shines brightly. Penny was visibly disappointed. "Damn it, I was so looking forward to playing tonight." "Look," I said, "why don't we go back to the clubhouse? We can practice and maybe there will be someone there who wants to play." As I pulled up to the main entrance of Eden Point, I turned onto the road leading to my house. "I just want to stop and pick up my check for this quarter's club dues," I told Penny. "I won't be long." I parked at the curb and hurried to the front door. I'd written the check last night and left it on my dresser, so I knew where to find it. But as I walked down the hallway, I heard sounds coming from the master bedroom, sounds I wasn't supposed to hear. "Oh, please do that again. Yes, just like that. Oh!" It was Melanie's voice. "What the hell?" I tiptoed down the hallway and peeked through the door. Melanie was lying naked on the bed, legs spread wide. A man was crouched between them, mastering her mouth and hands while she moaned and gasped. I felt as if I had been in a car accident. I was stunned. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Everything suddenly changed, and I couldn't understand what was happening. Then the man stood up and lifted Melanie's legs high to facilitate penetration. "No, this can't be happening," I thought, recognizing the figure of Frank Calhoun. I heard her moan as he entered her. Then she moaned, "Oh God, oh yes, oh God." I recoiled from the door as if I had been hit with a fist. It was too unbearable. My first impulse was to burst into the room and pounce on him. But what would that accomplish? I asked myself with despair. They've already cheated on me, and fighting him won't change anything. Besides, even if I managed to land the first blow, he's so much bigger than me that he could still beat me to a pulp. But I don't want him to get away with it. Freezing in place, I suddenly remembered that Penny was waiting for me in the car. Oh shit, I should take her home first before I come back here to confront them, I thought. In a daze, I walked back down the hallway and out the front door. I felt like I was going to throw up at any second. I looked up and saw Penny watching me through the car window. A moment later, I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. I don't know how I looked, but hardly good. Are you okay, Michael? Penny asked worriedly, looking at me. I couldn't speak. I gripped the steering wheel as hard as I could, steering the car toward Penny's house. As I pulled up to the house, I put the car in the parking lot and, without looking at her, I said, I'm sorry, Penny, but I can't go with you today. What's wrong, Michael? What's wrong? She asked with growing concern. When I didn't answer anything, she reached over and turned off the ignition, then took the keys, got out of the car and walked to my door. I turned to her. I have to go, Penny. Please give me my keys back. No, she said firmly. Not until you tell me what happened. When I didn't say anything, she opened the car door and pulled me by the arm. You're not going anywhere until you come inside and tell me what's going on. Robotically, I got out of the car and let her lead me into the house. She disappeared for a second and returned with a glass of ice water. I absent-mindedly sipped from it while she watched me. When I set the glass aside, she took my hand and squeezed it in hers. Tell me, Michael, what happened in there? Suddenly, all my resistance crumbled, and I leaned my back against the back of her couch. I tried to speak, but my throat suddenly constricted again, and I took another sip of water. It was Melanie and Frank, I said tensely. She looked at me incomprehensibly. Go on, she said. They were there together in our bedroom. They were, I whispered. She sighed. No, that can't be true. Melanie would never do that. The image of the two of them came back to me with full force, and I felt a tear run down my face. I never thought she'd do that either, I wheezed, feeling the pain in my throat intensify. Could it have been something else, Michael? Could you have been wrong? She asked. I realized she was trying to help, but that didn't stop my anger. When I looked in, she was lying on her back. When I left, he started having sex with her. So tell me, Penny, am I wrong? She flinched at my angry sarcasm. I'm sorry, Michael, I wasn't doubting you, I was just hoping there was some other explanation. A new pain shot through me. And with Frank Calhoun, I said angrily. How could she let that big baboon near her? I guess that explains why Frank started taking Melanie's Pilates class, Penny pondered. He took her class, I exclaimed. She never told me that. My anger was still simmering. Thank you so much for warning me, I said bitterly. Now Penny was hurting. That's not fair, Michael. I had no idea there was anything between them. I'm sorry, Penny, I said. I didn't mean to lash out at you, it's just really hard for me right now. She squeezed my hand. It's okay, Michael. I can only imagine how you're feeling right now. I stood up. I have to go, I told her. I have to get back out there and find out what's really going on. You're not going to do anything violent, Michael? No, I just need to get some questions answered. She squeezed my hand. Please let me know what's going on, Michael. And let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I thanked her and walked back to the car. As I drove home, I dreaded thinking about what was in store for me. I thought about all the questions I wanted to ask her and tried to anticipate her possible reaction. I expected tears, denials, and angry words. How should I respond to them? What about Frank? What if he was still there? I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my system. When I walked through the kitchen door, Melanie must have heard me because she came out to meet me. She was in her robe, and her hair was wrapped in a towel. You're back early, she said cheerfully. How was the match? We got caught in the rain, I said in a choppy voice. Oh, I'm sorry you couldn't play, she said. I bet Penny was disappointed. I just stared at her. I didn't feel like making small talk. They called about the rain right after we left, I said quietly. She blinked, but her expression didn't change. I went back inside, I told her. My heartbeat sped up. I saw you and Frank together. Of the many scenarios I'd imagined, Melanie's reaction wasn't what I'd envisioned. I'm sorry you had to see that, she said evenly. Is that all you have to say? I asked incredulously. You cheat on me and you're sorry I had to witness it? You're not even going to apologize for sleeping with him? How long has this been going on? Don't you have any explanations? She crossed her arms and sighed. Sit down, Michael, she said, gesturing to the table in the breakfast room. I prefer to stand, I said angrily. Suit yourself, she said, and sat back in her chair. I stood, stunned by her complete lack of response. Look, Michael, we were going to tell you about this soon anyway, but I guess this is just pushing the deadline back a bit. I'm leaving you. Frank and I love each other, and I'm going to move in with him. We're going to get married as soon as the divorce is finalized. I decided to dodge without risking a fall. Before I could say anything, she jumped up and said, Wait here, and disappeared into our bedroom. She returned a few minutes later, clutching a stack of papers in her hands. She held them out to me across the table. It doesn't have to be sarcasm, she said. I don't even want to get child support from you. I took all the money out of our savings account, but it's only fair since I'm leaving you the house. It's a lot better than you'll get if we go to court, but I don't mind if you sign the papers and let us move on with our lives. I looked at the stack of papers. It was a divorce petition. Have you been to a lawyer yet? I asked in amazement. What about our marriage? What happened to the last 10 years we spent together? I'm so sorry, Michael. I didn't plan this. It just happened. Just accept it. It is what it is. Accept it, I exclaimed. Accept that my beloved wife is having sex with that asshole Frank Calhoun in our own bed? Accept that our marriage is over? She stood up. I'm disappointed, Michael. I was hoping for a more mature response from you. She turned and walked back to the bedroom. I sat at my desk looking at the divorce papers in front of me and trying to make sense of what was happening. If someone had asked me that morning, I would have said that I loved my wife and that we had a good marriage. Then this afternoon I found out that she was leaving me for another man. Talk about cognitive dissonance. In the silence, I heard the buzzing of a cell phone and then scraps of conversation. He saw us, as you'd expect. That would be good. When she returned, she was fully dressed and carrying an overnight bag and a makeup kit. Now that you mention it, I'm not going to stay here overnight. Frank's coming to get me. We'll come back on Monday when you're at work and get the rest of my stuff. So you're leaving, just like that? That's the way it's supposed to be, she said. Fine, I said bitterly. What do you want me to tell our friends? She sighed. Look, Michael, Frank and I haven't done anything wrong, and we're not going to hide like criminals. We're going to continue to have an active social life. In fact, tomorrow night, we'll probably go to a reception at Eden Point. You won't have to tell anyone anything because everyone will already know about it. At that moment, a horn sounded outside. Melanie looked out the window. Frank's here, she said. I'm leaving. Closing the door, she leaned in again and looked at me. Just sign the papers, Michael. The sooner you do it, the better it will be for all of us. Then she walked away. I don't know how long I sat like that. Emotions raged through me like the cars of a train rushing through a crossroads. One minute I was seething with anger. The next minute I was remembering happy times. And the third minute I was sad. I told myself I'd treated her like a queen, and then wondered what I'd done to push her away. I'm better off without her, I repeated, until loneliness overwhelmed me. The beep of a cell phone startled me, and I quickly answered it. Subconsciously, I was hoping to hear Melanie's voice, but it was Penny. What's up, Michael? She asked. Not so good, I replied. She left me. I heard, she said. You heard? I said in amazement. Where? How? I'm sorry, Michael, she said sadly. Frank was bragging about it at the club. Oh shit, I thought. It's already started. On Sunday, I called the captain of our men's team. There was no way I wanted to go out on the field. Sorry, Joe, I told him. You're going to have to cut me out of the lineup today. I've got some personal issues to take care of. Yeah, I heard, he said sympathetically. Sorry to hear about that. Good luck. I thanked him, but I knew I'd have better luck yet. I spent the rest of the day in the house. I must have been hiding, though it pained me to admit it. There were sports on TV, but I wasn't paying attention. My thoughts kept returning to my marriage to Melanie. Why did it go wrong? When had she stopped loving me? I was sure she fell in love with me when she got married right out of college. We didn't break up all through senior year. I proposed to her over Christmas break. She was majoring in physical education and health, and whenever the fraternity brothers saw her in workout clothes, they gave me a hard time. She had a combination of cuteness, trimness, and sexiness that was almost irresistible. I gave up trying as soon as I met her. We blended easily into married life. I got a great job in Atlanta, and she got a job as an instructor in an aerobics class. After a few years, we saved enough money for a down payment on a house and found what we were looking for in a new development called Eden Point. I felt that here at Eden Point, we were truly happy. I got several promotions in my company, and Melanie decided to start her own business. By then, we had enough money to rent space for her studio in one of the small shopping centers in the area, and things were going very well for her. Our savings account was growing, we made a lot of friends and acquaintances, especially in Eden Point, and we even talked about starting a family in a year or two. Our sex life had quieted down a bit, but that didn't surprise me. My job kept me busy, and daily Pilates classes would have exhausted anyone. Thinking back on it all, I began to realize that things had really slowed down over the past 6 months, although I hadn't noticed it at the time. I also remembered that sometimes Melanie seemed a little distracted, like she was in another world. But when we made love, I felt better than ever, and I thought Melanie felt the same way. Obviously, I was wrong. I mentally reprimanded myself. How could I have been so blind that I hadn't realized she had another man? How could I not know that she had fallen out of love with me and fallen in love with Frank Calhoun? The only thing I could assume was that when you love and trust another, you don't look for signs of betrayal and deceit. No, I thought sardonically, you just have to wait until they hit you in the back of the head. On Monday, I went to work early to try to get ahead of things. Around 9 o'clock, I called my attorney's office and tried to make an appointment. When the secretary asked about the purpose of the meeting, I didn't want to bring up the subject of Melanie and me, so I told her that I needed to make some changes to my will. When she came back on the line, she said she could see me right after lunch. When I arrived at his law office, Jonathan met me in the lobby. He had been a classmate of ours when we were students, and I had approached him when Melanie and I decided to make our wills. As we settled into his office, he looked at me with concern. "Is everything all right, Michael? I understand that you need to make changes to your will. You or Melanie aren't sick, are you?" "Thanks for your concern, Jonathan, but it's not that bad," I told him. Then I handed him the papers Melanie had given me on Saturday. As he read them, he tisk-tisked to himself. When he finished, he looked up at me. "I'm sorry to hear about this, Michael. Do you think there's any chance of reconciliation?" "I don't think so. She's already moved out of our house and moved in with her boyfriend. She told me they plan to get married as soon as our divorce is final." He shook his head. "I wasn't expecting that. You two seemed like the perfect couple." Then his expression changed and his voice took on a professional tone. "Given these circumstances, I, as your legal advisor, advise you to sign this agreement immediately." "So just like that, 10 years of marriage went down the drain?" I said bitterly. He shook his head patiently. "In matters like this, Michael, you have to stop thinking with your heart and start thinking with your head. I believe Melanie has made you a very generous offer, much better than you'll get if you decide to fight for her. She may be guided in part by guilt, but I'm willing to bet that the main reason is to give you an incentive to say yes as soon as possible, so she can marry her new man. While it may seem to you now that you're giving in to her, in reality, if your marriage breaks up, that's the best you can hope for." I knew he was right. Heck, after what she had done, I didn't want to stay married to her anyway. But I still felt like she and Frank had beaten me at a game I didn't even realize I was playing. Jonathan's tone became sympathetic again. "Look, Michael, I know the lawyer Melanie used. If you sign, we can file this settlement agreement in court very quickly. It'll document what she offered. Then, if she repents and wants to come back and you're willing to accept it, you'll have 30 days to refuse the divorce." I knew that wasn't going to happen. "May I borrow your pen?" I asked. Back at the office, I headed straight to HR. I needed to make a lot of changes to my health insurance 401k plan and a host of other spousal benefits. The clerk who assisted me must have done this a lot because he quickly prepared all the necessary forms. As I was signing them, I looked up and saw him looking at me. I guess now I won't have to make an announcement in the office, I thought wryly. In the evening on my way home, I stopped by one of the neighborhood restaurants and picked up some dinner. But when I got home, I found that Melanie had been there during the day and had packed everything she wanted. Of course, all of her makeup was gone, but I was surprised to find a few articles of clothing left behind. Upon closer inspection, however, I realized that they were things she no longer wore. Guess I'll have to take them to Goodwill, I thought dejectedly. Further investigation revealed that the bedroom wasn't the only place she had raided. Our good china had disappeared, as well as most of the serving pieces we had received as wedding gifts. In the kitchen, I noticed that dishes and a set of good carving knives had also been taken away. Several pieces of furniture were missing, and when I went into the living room, I saw that most of our CD and DVD collections were gone as well. Going through our belongings, I noticed that she had left our wedding album untouched. Somehow, that depressed me more than all the stuff she had taken with her. It was like she wanted to erase all the memories of her life with me. I went back to the kitchen and stashed the food I had bought in the refrigerator. I had no appetite left after her invasion. I mentally tagged myself to change the locks. Damn it. How can you go from a happily married man to a lonely divorcee in 3 days? I asked myself. I asked myself. I asked myself. I asked myself. It all seemed so damn unfair. I spent the next week in virtual isolation, getting to work early and leaving late every day. The rest of the time I stayed in the house. The humiliation of having Frank Calhoun steal my wife away from me was excruciating, and the fact that there was nothing I could do about it was almost unbearable. I confess I had fantasies of assaults with baseball bats or brass knuckles. Sometimes I dreamed of assassins and car bombs. But then I would return to the real world. Did I really want to ruin my own life to get revenge on a jerk who chased a skirt and a wife who couldn't keep her legs together? By Friday, I decided it was time to come out of my cocoon. I hadn't done anything wrong, and I had no reason to hide. I called Penny. Hey partner, don't we have a tennis match scheduled for this weekend? I asked, trying to sound upbeat and positive. Oh, Michael, I'm so glad to hear from you, she said quickly. I've thought about calling you so many times, but I decided that maybe you should be alone for a while. Thanks, Penny, I replied, softening my tone. It's been a rough week. I told her everything that had happened and then asked her what had happened at Eden Point that I had missed. She hesitated for a few seconds before admitting that our situation had been talked about all over the neighborhood. You'd think they could find something better to discuss, I said sharply. Maybe they will, Penny agreed. But Frank and Melanie are having a hard time right now. They've been socializing at the club every night since last Saturday. Frank's almost openly bragging about who wins over whoever's better, and Melanie's clinging to him like a lovesick schoolgirl. You could hear the anger in her voice. That's just disgusting, Michael. I immediately dropped her Pilates class and told her I couldn't be her friend anymore, she said. Her loyalty made me feel a little better. What about the others, Penny? What are they saying? I asked. I think it's what you'd expect, Michael. There are those who are very unhappy with Frank and Melanie, and they try to avoid the lovebirds as much as possible. And then there's the group that always revolves around Frank. They extol his valor, if you know what I mean. But for most people, it's just a sad, awkward situation, and they try to stay as far away from it as possible. Rationally, I knew that would be the case, but some part of me wished society would tar and feather Frank and Melanie and run them out of town on rails, but I was determined not to let my disappointment hold me back. If anything, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life underground, I told Penny. We have a game scheduled for Saturday, and unless you don't want to, I intend to take the court with my partner, I told her. I'm glad, Michael, she told me fervently. You can count on me. I deliberately arrived at the tennis court a little late to avoid talking about topics I didn't want to discuss. It didn't help much. As I approached the tennis pavilion, I could feel the stares of my neighbors and teammates. I could understand their curiosity, but I still hated the feeling. Upon seeing me, the captain of our mixed doubles team rushed over to me. Michael, I'm really sorry. The other team made last-second changes to their lineup, and some matches have already started, so I can't change anything. If you don't want to play, I understand. What are you talking about, Mary? I asked. I don't understand. It's Frank, she said. You and Penny are supposed to play Frank and his partner. Oh shit, I thought. That's the last thing I wanted to do. At that moment, Penny walked over, and when she realized what was going on, her face went pale. She pulled me aside and whispered, We don't have to do this, Michael. It's no big deal. We'll just lose and play someone else next week. No, I said loud enough for Penny to jump up. I'm not going to hide from that bastard for the rest of my life. I'm going to have to face him, and I'd better start right now. Penny threw me a concerned look, but I turned back to Mary. It's okay, I told her. Penny and I are here to play. It was a massacre. I was playing worse than I had in years, and my obvious emotions were taking their toll on Penny as well. Frank, on the other hand, was on top of his game, and his powerful ground strokes were scorching the net like RPG projectiles. To make matters worse, he was constantly bantering with me throughout the match. Come on, Michael, you can hit harder, he yelled after I executed a weak shot that he shattered. Another time he yelled, your wife can hit harder. Oh wait, I was wrong. You don't have a wife. I just went ballistic. Besides, a crowd had gathered for our little match, and I looked up to see Melanie standing at the fence. To her credit, she grumbled at some of Frank's comments, but never once looked in my direction. At one point, I threw a weak second serve over the net, and Frank hit it right back to Penny. It bounced off her shoulder and almost knocked her down. I rushed toward the net with my racket clutched, ready to decapitate the bastard, but Penny grabbed my arm and begged me not to follow him to the net. It was a fair shot, she said. I'm fine, it doesn't hurt. It's just part of the game. I looked at him with venom in my eyes as he pretended to tie his shoelaces. Eventually, I returned to my seat in anger and frustration. The final score was 6-2, 6-1, a humiliating defeat. Gritting my teeth, I walked to the net to shake hands with our opponents. Frank's partner seemed embarrassed by his performance and apologized after shaking my hand. Frank, on the other hand, simply walked up to us and without bothering to extend his hand said, "That was a lot of fun. Let's do it again next time you feel like fooling around." Then he defiantly turned around, walked over to Melanie and kissed her soundly through the waist-high fence. I don't know what Penny saw on my face, but she grabbed my hand and dragged me off the court. He's trying to provoke you, Michael. He wants you to start a fight with him. Don't let him get to you. Please, for my sake. I sat down on the podium and someone handed me a glass of ice water. I took a few sips and then poured the rest of the water over my head. I couldn't have felt worse than I had that day. I apologized to Penny for playing it so badly, and although she protested, I got in my car and drove home. Throwing my clothes in the laundry basket, I dragged myself into the shower and splashed water on myself for half an hour. When the water finally cooled, I got out, wiped myself off, and collapsed on the bed, angry and disgusted. I knew why I'd lost. I'd let Frank possess me. That knowledge only made me feel worse. He'd gotten to me, and he'd gotten to Melanie too, though obviously in a different way. But the result was the same, to turn a loser like Frank into a big winner. I vowed to myself that I wasn't going to take Frank's bullying any longer, and neither was Melanie's. I would find a way to break them both. I just had to figure out how to do it. I lay down on my bed and thought about what my old tennis coach used to tell me. Play to your opponent's weaknesses. That sounds good in theory, but how can I apply it to this situation? I know myself. Once I start working on a problem, my brain keeps attacking it, even when I switch to other tasks. In fact, I've often found that if I leave a problem for a while, when I come back to it, I can easily find a solution. That's what happened in this case. I pondered the problem for a while, and then set it aside to spend most of Sunday finishing up yard work that I had neglected. By evening, I was so tired that falling asleep was not a problem. When I went to work the next day, I realized I had a possible solution. It will probably be expensive, I thought to myself, but if it works, it will be worth it. About mid-morning, I called one of our top salesmen. "Hey, Jerry," I said, picking up the phone. "Any chance you'll have lunch with me today?" My treat. "Sure, Michael, especially if you're buying." We met at a grill bar I knew, which was a little dilapidated, but it had great food. After we ordered, Jerry looked at me. "Hi, Michael. I was sorry to hear about you and Melanie. I thought you guys were doing well." "Yeah, me too, Jerry, me too. But that's actually why I wanted to talk to you." "Sure, Michael. I'll be glad to help in any way I can." "Okay, Jerry. Here's my question then. When you entertain your best clients, do you ever have to use an escort?" He looked at me strangely. "No, Michael, absolutely not. It's against company policy and I would never do it." I leaned across the table to him. "Jerry, this is not company business and we're not here on business. This is strictly personal, if you know what I mean." He stared at me for a few seconds. Then a light flashed in his eyes. "Oh, I understand," he said. "I guess it's been a long period of drought for you with your wife splitting up and you not participating in dating and all." He paused. then leaned closer to me. Sure, I know one of the best services in town. But listen, Michael, they only cater to the biggest players, you know? Their girls are incredible, but I think they might be unaffordable. I smiled at him. Let me worry about that. Just tell me how to contact them and what to expect. And over a burger and a beer, he did just that. After lunch, I nervously reviewed the notes I had taken during lunch. I hoped I was doing everything right. Then I remembered how Frank had taunted me, how Melanie had announced with a cold stare that she was leaving, and I decided to act. I called the number Jerry had given me, and a pleasant male voice answered. Hello, can I help you? Yes, I'd like to speak to Mr. Henry Miller, I said as if on cue. This is Mr. Miller, the voice replied. What are you looking for? Something from Grove Press, I replied. Please state your name, sir. I considered using an alias, but Jerry explicitly hinted at the need to identify myself accurately. They're always worried about the vice police, he told me. They'll go to great lengths to make sure you're not a cop trying to set them up. I told him my real name. Are you calling from your office? Mr. Miller asked. Yes, I replied, but this is a personal matter. It has nothing to do with my company. I understand all that, sir. Now, could you give me the switchboard number where you work? Of course, I said. But would you like to know my direct phone number? No, he replied. I'll call the main number and ask for you, then we can take care of your business. Pretty smart, I thought to myself. If he calls and the operator answers, he'll know he's calling a real company and not a police station. And if she transfers his call to me, he'll know I'm really an employee of the company. It's not foolproof, of course, but it's pretty good. I gave him the number for the main switchboard and he immediately hung up. A few minutes later, my phone rang and the operator transferred the call to me. It was Mr. Miller. He then asked for my cell phone number. This will allow us to contact you after hours should the need arise, he explained. After I handed him the cell phone, he continued. Now that we've gotten rid of the identification procedure, he said, please tell us how our service can help you. I'm looking for a very special companion who might be available for a few cases stretching over a month or more. Said the voice. That's a bit unusual. We don't usually commit to such a long period of time. We may be able to help you, but it will be expensive. He named a price that made my eyes glaze over. I swallowed. It'll be fine, Mr. Miller. Very well. Do you have any special requirements? Yes, I said. She must look like a goddess. He grinned. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, sir, but I think you'll be able to find a companion to your liking. He paused. Do you have a pen handy? When I assured him I did, he gave me their website address. I noticed that the URL started with HTTPS, which meant secure server. When I typed it in, it informed me, to my amazement, that I had to type in Anais Nin when asked for a username. It then gave me a numeric password. Please understand, sir, that your username and password will be changed after you make your selection. This is for your safety and ours. When I confirmed my understanding, he continued. Now about payment, sir. Once you make your choice and the session is scheduled, your credit card will be charged for the amount you just agreed to. In addition, our clients should express their appreciation directly to our companions. If you are satisfied with everything, we recommend leaving a 25% tip. I made a few quick mental calculations. This has to work, I thought, or I will not only be ruined, but humiliated. Very well, sir. When you are ready to make your choice, please go to our website. There you will be able to make all other arrangements. Good day, sir. After that, the line cut off. I waited until I got home in the evening to go to the website Henry had given me. The main screen listed only Capricorn services with the caption, "We cater to the needs of the most discerning customers." Using the username and password Henry had given me, I logged into the site and a window opened up in front of me that could have come straight off the pages of a Victoria's Secret catalog. All of the women pictured there were so gorgeous that I wondered why they weren't in the modeling business instead of the escort business. In fact, I even wondered if these pictures were copied from some modeling site as part of a fraudulent scheme. But my buddy Jerry insisted that Capricorn was real, so I decided to take my chances. I assumed I'd pick a blonde, but then a photo of a woman with shoulder-length dark hair caught my eye, and I impulsively clicked on Rhiannon. The confirmation that appeared on the screen assured me that Rhiannon would contact me within 24 hours to arrange our meeting. I was then prompted to enter my credit card information. When the card number and expiration date were verified, the screen went dark and I was suddenly thrown off the site. Out of curiosity, I tried to access the Capricorn website again, but this time the welcome screen did not recognize my username and password, and after a second attempt, I was thrown back to the homepage. I was impressed with the security of their system and thought this was a hopeful sign. If they went for it, then perhaps their service is as good as Jerry claimed. All the next day, I was stressed out waiting for Rhiannon to call. At one point, I even considered backing out of the deal. My little plan was going to cost a lot of money, and there was no guarantee of success. But when I walked into the break room to get myself a cup of coffee, the two secretaries who had been talking when I walked in immediately shut up and turned their backs on me. It didn't take a genius to realize who was the topic of their conversation. The pain of being the subject of office gossip strengthened my resolve. No matter what, I wasn't going to continue to be a helpless victim if I could do anything about it. It wasn't until after dinner that my cell phone rang, and when I answered, a melodious voice said, "Hi, Michael, this is Rhiannon calling. I'm looking forward to seeing you." I swallowed and answered, suggesting we meet for dinner to discuss my request. When she agreed, I suggested the same grill where Jerry and I had dinner. It was small, dark, and far enough away from Eden Point that I was unlikely to run into any of the neighbors. She laughed. "How interesting. I don't think I've ever had the pleasure of dining there. I'll look forward to seeing you." With those words, she hung up the phone. Well, this is it, I thought. The grill wasn't too crowded on this weekday, which was one of the reasons I'd chosen this particular spot, and the low lighting also suited my purposes. But when she walked through the door, it was as if a spotlight had fallen on her. She saw me stand up nervously, walked over and shook my hand confidently. "Hello, Michael," she said in her musical voice. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person." She sat down, and I followed her. I must have been staring at her because she laughed and said, "So how do I look?" We've all seen movie stars on the big screen or models in magazines. They're gorgeous, but they're not real. But now I met one in person, and the impression was overwhelming. The young woman sitting across from me was simply stunning. Dark eyes, high cheekbones, plump lips, hair framing her face, an athletic but feminine figure. I could go on, but the fact remains that for a few moments all I did was stare at her in mute amazement. She smiled and broke the silence. "I suppose you approve of me," she said. "Oh yes, I'm sorry," I said, stammering. My voice trailed off in embarrassment. Luckily, at that moment, a waitress came over to take our orders. I don't even remember what I ordered, but Rhiannon settled on a green salad with dressing on the side. As the waitress wrote down her choices, I realized that she too had fallen under Rhiannon's spell. She glanced at her every now and then until finally she muttered, "Aren't you on TV?" Rhiannon smiled sweetly at her. "No, I'm afraid not," she said, and the waitress left, muttering to herself. Their brief exchange allowed the rational part of my brain to engage again. I looked at Rhiannon curiously. "I bet that happens to you a lot." She nodded unconsciously. "Yes, it happens a lot." "Can I ask you a question? Why aren't you working in television or modeling instead of—" I asked, hesitating a little at the end. "I've considered it," she admitted, "but it's a very cruel world. I may look good, but I'm just one of many in this world. The odds of success are about the same as a basketball player getting into the NBA. But in this line of work, I stand out. And unlike modeling or acting, I didn't have to starve for years paying my dues. From the very beginning in this business, I maximized my money. By the time my looks start to fade, I'll have accumulated enough money to live off the investment for the rest of my life. And if I'm really lucky, I'll find a rich man who wants a trophy wife, and he won't care what she does for a living." I couldn't help but nod. I didn't agree with the career she'd chosen, but she'd approached it reasonably. At that moment, the waitress brought our dinners. After serving Rhiannon, she looked at her again and said, "Are you sure you're not on TV? I'm just sure I've seen you before." Rhiannon shook her head. "I don't think so. If I had been, I'd probably remember it." I tried to suppress a laugh as the waitress hurried away. As we began to eat, she looked at me carefully. "So, Michael, why don't you tell me what's on your mind? Henry said it's something unusual." I blushed and started to tell her my story. When I recounted my conversation with Melanie after I caught her and Frank in bed, Rhiannon threw me a sympathetic look. "That was pretty cold," she said. When I told her about Frank Calhoun and the way he'd behaved, she nodded understandingly. "I've met a lot of people like him." She wiped her mouth and folded her hands on the table. "So what exactly do you want to do and how do I fit into that picture?" I spent the next 15 minutes describing what I hoped to accomplish in the next month or so. When I was done, I admitted that I had a lot of doubts about what I was trying to accomplish. But I can't sit back and let those two treat me roughly without fighting back. And now that I've met you, I'm starting to think it might work. She smiled broadly. "What a nice compliment," she said. Then she leaned forward across the table. "You know what? I think I'm going to like this." "Great," said I enthusiastically, and reached out to shake her hand to seal the deal. She laughed and shook my hand firmly in return. "To partners in crime," she said with a sly smile. Then she sat up and did something I didn't yet understand with her body, and suddenly she was radiating raw sexuality. I realized I had a hard-on. "Well," she said in a low, sexy voice, "now that we've finished the business part of our meeting, how about we move to a more comfortable place and relax?" My mouth was suddenly dry and I had to take a sip of water before I could speak. "No," I said, "it's just that we need to get to know each other better tonight." She gave me a wry smile. "You don't find me attractive?" "Oh, God, no," I replied, stammering. "I mean, yes. But that's not the point. It's just that I'm trying to focus on what we're planning to do here. And it would be better for me not to mess with you like this, don't you see? But I have something else for you." With those words, I handed her an envelope across the table. Earlier, I had put some large bills in it. She took it triumphantly, and it disappeared into her purse. Then she changed her pose again, and her sexual side seemed to recede. "I think I understand, Michael." She tilted her head slightly to look at me. "You're a very interesting man. I think I'm going to enjoy our little adventure together." With those words, she got up and left, and I was left sitting in the booth. For some reason, I felt drained. What a woman, I thought. We had planned for the first phase of Operation Honey Trap to begin on Saturday, right after lunch. The temperature in Atlanta had already spiked, and I figured the pool at Eden Point would be crowded. I was a little worried about whether Rhiannon would show up, but shortly after noon, a BMW Z4 pulled up in my driveway. She came to my door carrying a small bag, and when I raised my eyebrows, said, "My swimsuits." She looked around and smiled. "So this is the suburbs. Do you like it here?" I frowned. "Until recently, I liked it." She stroked my cheek. "We'll fix that." At the club, we split up to go to the locker rooms and change into suits. As we agreed, I went out first and found two lounge chairs next to a table with an umbrella. No sooner had I gotten comfortable than I noticed the big guy Frank Calhoun heading my way. "Well, Michael," he muttered, "I'm surprised to see you in the pool today. I would have thought you were taking lessons from a pro and trying to improve your tennis game." I knew he was trying to bait me, but I answered him emphatically. "No, today, my girlfriend and I are going to go lounge in the pool and get a tan." Frank wasn't going to let me go that easily. "Oh, you have a girlfriend now? I'd like to meet her." By now, our conversation had caught the attention of everyone within earshot. That suited me just fine. "Well, you're in luck, Frank. There she is," I said, pointing to the door to the women's locker room. Oh my God. There was silence among the club members as Rhiannon approached us. I expected her to be in a bikini, but to my surprise, she was wearing a one-piece swimsuit. But somehow it was much more seductive. It was made of some kind of silver material that reflected the sun and attracted the attention of all the men and women. I heard a click and realized she was wearing stiletto heels. They made her calves, thighs, and butt look amazing. As she approached us, I shifted my gaze from her legs to her costume. It looked different, and then I realized it was made of the best material I'd ever seen. It followed the exact contours of her body, and when I looked closer, it was clear that the suit was completely unlined. It looked like it had been painted on her body. She walked over to me, entwined her arm with mine, pressed her breasts against my bicep, and kissed my cheek. "Great, honey," she cooed. "You've found a place for us." Then she turned to Frank. "Who's your friend, Michael?" I looked at Frank and to my delight saw that his mouth was ajar, as he stared at the vision before him. "Rhiannon," I said, Meet Frank. Frank, this is my girlfriend, Rhiannon. His mouth slammed shut and he quickly extended his hand for a handshake. Welcome to Eden Point, he said rather grandly. If there's anything I can help you with, please don't hesitate. Rhiannon smiled sweetly. Oh, how sweet. Turning to me, she asked affectionately, Is everyone here as nice as Frank? I replied sharply, No, Frank is unique. She smiled at him again. Thank you so much for making me feel at home. When he remained standing still, she looked down with a smile. You can let go of my hand now. Oh, he said embarrassed. Well, I should get going. I hope to see you again, Rhiannon. That is, I hope we shall meet again. With those words, he awkwardly turned away and walked back to the other side of the pool, looking over his shoulder a few times as he went. I looked that way and noticed Melanie sitting with her arms crossed. She didn't look happy. Rhiannon and I settled into the chaise lounge. She took my hand and pulled me closer so I could whisper in her ear. I think that went pretty well. I squeezed her hand. You were perfect, I assured her. She smiled and gave me a quick kiss on the lips. I know she meant it in a friendly way, but I could still feel her lips 15 minutes later. Then she stretched out on the chaise lounge face down. Put some suntan lotion on me, will you, Michael? As I happily complied, I was sure I heard male moans nearby. For the next few hours, I think everyone who was at the pool that day tried to walk past us to get a glimpse of my new girlfriend. I know for a fact that all of my male team members stopped by, and after exchanging a few funny words, made sure to introduce them to Rhiannon. She was gracious to each of them, and chatted with them like old friends. At one point, I leaned over and whispered in her ear, You should get into politics. She only smiled and winked at me. In my line of work, I'm only one step away from that. I chuckled. When things quieted down, she leaned toward me again. Which one is she? I knew exactly who she meant and pointed her to Melanie on the other side of the pool. Okay, she said. Leave it to me. She put on her high-heeled shoes and, clicking her clips, walked over to the side of the pool where Melanie was swimming. Bending at the waist, she removed her shoes from her feet and dived gracefully into the shallow water. Upon surfacing, she bowed her head forward and then quickly threw it back so that her hair formed a graceful arc over her head, splashing water in the air in a fan shape. I was totally enthralled. I'd seen this move before in commercials, but I'd never seen it in real life. It was amazing. Then Rhiannon swam gracefully out of the water and onto the deck in one motion. Standing facing Melanie, with water running down her body, she threw her hair back. Then she put the mules back on her feet, adding 4 inches of height to her body, and walked over to where I stood watching. I reluctantly shifted my gaze from Rhiannon to Melanie. She looked at me angrily. Then she turned and addressed Frank sharply before grabbing her things and heading for the exit. He followed her, glancing back over his shoulder at Rhiannon again. She settled gracefully into the chaise lounge, closing her eyes. I heard her mutter, Mission accomplished. While we were there, only one unpleasant thing happened. As we were getting ready to leave, I looked up and saw Penny walking in my direction. Oh crap, I thought. I totally forgot about Penny's women's team playing today. What am I going to say to her? Hey Michael, it's so good to see you out on the street again. Maybe we can get together and play some more. She stopped abruptly as Rhiannon stood up and grabbed my hand. Oh, Penny said surprised. Who's that? This is Rhiannon, my date, I said awkwardly. Penny blinked and looked at Rhiannon in silence for a while. Then she held out her hand. I'm Penny, she said. Nice to meet you. She turned to me again. I need to clean myself up. I'm pretty dirty after our match tonight. I'll see you around, Michael. She turned and ran off before I could think of what to say in response. Who was that? Rhiannon asked curiously. It was Penny Pennington, I told her. She's my mixed doubles partner. Interesting, she replied. I mentally berated myself for not thinking ahead of time about what to do with Penny. I didn't want to risk revealing my plan, but I didn't want Penny to get the wrong idea either. Damn it. Shortly after that, Rhiannon and I decided to call it a day. I felt like we had accomplished everything we wanted to do today. As we left the pool, I swear I heard the conversation level rise noticeably. When we got back to my apartment, I let Rhiannon use the shower while I dried myself off and reflected on the previous day. Except for the unexpected encounter with Penny, things had gone better than I had hoped. I'd shown Melanie that I wasn't going to sit around and mourn her passing for the rest of my life. More than that, I showed her that not only could I not replace her, but that I had grown a lot myself. Let her reflect on that for a while, I thought triumphantly. So how do you think it went? I heard a voice ask me from behind. Turning around, I saw Rhiannon standing there, wrapped in a bath towel. You were great, replied I enthusiastically. You were everything I hoped for and more. She did something with her fingers, and suddenly the towel slipped to her feet. Don't you want to celebrate? She asked coquettishly. Flirtatiously, she asked. For a moment I froze, unable to breathe. Everything about her was perfect. There wasn't an ounce of fat on her. On the contrary, her abdominal muscles were well developed and drew my gaze. From there, her legs, strong and perfectly formed, seemed to stretch endlessly. I gasped and realized I was holding my breath. Pulling myself together, I stepped toward her, bent down, and handed her the towel she'd dropped. I'm sorry, Rhiannon. It's just not a good time. She smiled. Okay, I was just checking. She threw the towel over her shoulder and stepped away from me. My God, how I hadn't gotten a good look at her ass before. When she returned, she was already dressed and packing her bag. I handed her a sealed envelope. Thank you, I said fervently. Today was exactly what I wanted. She tilted her head amusedly again and looked at me. Do you want to go back to Melanie's? She asked suddenly. I flinched. No, I said firmly. This wasn't some one-time error in judgment or loss of control. She deliberately discarded me like unwanted junk. I wouldn't have accepted her back under any circumstances. That's what I thought, she said. But I was just wondering. Anyway, are we still on for next week? Oh, sure, I said, grinning widely. I made sure to go to tennis practice at the club during the week. I wanted everyone to know I was overhiding. Glad you're back and out on the field, our team captain told me. My teammates greeted me with a pat on the back and a wide wink. Behind me, I heard someone say, "Lucky son of a bitch." I smiled. I knew the impression Rhiannon could make. A couple days later, I returned to the mixed doubles practice court, but Penny was nowhere to be found. Our captain told me she was sick. When I got home from practice, I called her right away. Are you okay, Penny? I asked. It's not like you to be sick. Oh, it's nothing serious. It's probably just a little bug going around. Can I get you anything? I asked. I'd love to get you something. No, she said sharply. Thanks, but I don't need anything. Anyway, it's best if you stay away. I don't want you to get infected with what I have. Well, okay, I said hesitantly. But if you get worse, call me right away. I'm worried about you. She made me a vague promise and then said she needed to rest, so I let her go. I wasn't happy about it. Penny had always been so healthy and vital. It alarmed me to think there might be something wrong with her. And our little run-in at the pool last Saturday probably didn't help, I thought. I still felt like I couldn't tell her about my honey trap for fear of ruining things, but I just hated giving Penny the wrong impression. I hope she forgives me when this is over, I thought. The next step in my plan was scheduled for that weekend. The club was having a dinner party, and Rhiannon and I planned to perform at it. When she pulled up to my house, she was dressed very differently than the last time we went out. Wow, you look like you just stepped out of a fashion magazine, I said, looking at her. She was wearing a casual outfit consisting of a skirt, a casual jacket, and a blouse. But although it all looked casual, the fabrics, styles, and accessories screamed high fashion. She curtsied like a little girl. Thank you, kind sir. Actually, they just showed up at Nordstrom's, she said. But don't worry if you're not familiar with the labels. My main focus today is the ladies, and one lady in particular. Well, I can't speak for the wives, but I think you'll still have a big influence on the men, I told her sincerely. As we pulled into the parking lot in front of the clubhouse, Rhiannon turned to me and said, We need to change tactics a bit today. We need to split up and socialize with everyone here. That will allow me to do what I need to do. Sounds good to me, I told her. As we walked out onto the patio where the dinner was being held, I immediately realized we were both right. Once again, most of the men were looking openly at Rhiannon. The wives were a little more reserved, but even from them I heard more than one comment about Rhiannon's attire this evening. A few of the more adventurous women asked where she found her clothes, and soon Rhiannon was cheerfully exchanging shopping tips with them. After chatting for a bit, she and I returned to our food. Any progress? I asked quietly. Oh, I've been very busy, she replied seriously. I've been learning a lot about what the wives think about the situation with you, Melanie and Frank. More importantly, I've been making your ex's life miserable. I was also flirting with her fiancé quite a bit, and she didn't like it one bit. I only grinned. It was obvious Rhiannon knew exactly what buttons to push. I was chatting with one of my teammates when Melanie walked by and pointed at me. Curious, I followed her to see what she wanted. When she turned to face me, I saw her face flushed with anger. Looks like you're wasting no time in getting back into the dating game, she said gruffly. I didn't realize there was a mandatory waiting period, I said wryly. Yeah? Well, I don't think you're aware of that, Michael. Where the hell did you find her? I never met her when we were married. I met her through work, I replied simply. I'd be careful if I were you. She seems like a lot more than you can handle. I couldn't help myself. You're wrong, Melanie. I'm practicing with her every chance I get. Really? She said hotly. Then you'd better keep her away from Frank. And with those words, she walked away. I smiled to myself. Everything was going exactly as I had hoped. At that moment, I saw Penny carrying a tray of food. I knew she was on the entertainment committee, but I didn't know if she would feel well enough to come tonight. I rushed over to her and grabbed her hand. She blushed when she saw me. I'm so glad you're feeling better, I told her. You should have called me and let me know you felt well enough to come over tonight. I guess I wasn't sure until the last minute, Michael. Besides, I figured you'd be here with your new girlfriend, and I didn't want to bother you. At that moment, Rhiannon walked by, laughing and talking to one of my teammates. And I see I was right, Penny continued with a frown. She started to walk away, but I grabbed her arm again. Wait, Penny. We need to talk about our next match. She hesitated, then apparently made a decision. Michael, I've had a lot on my plate lately, so I've decided to drop the mixed doubles and focus on the women's team. I was shocked. You can't do that, Penny, I whispered. You're my partner. Who do I play with? Penny glanced over her shoulder at me, and when I turned around, I saw Rhiannon standing there. You'll find someone, Michael, Penny said. Now please let me go. I need to put the food away. When I let go of her hand, she hurried away. Rhiannon took my hand and walked with me to a vacant table. Once we were seated, she leaned over to me and whispered, Just so you know, this girl is in love with you. What? No, that's crazy. She's my tennis partner. She was in Melanie's Pilates class. And if I'm not mistaken, Rhiannon continued, ignoring me, you might have a little crush on her too. No, I protested. You're wrong. She's just a good friend. Maybe, she said skeptically. Anyway, I think we've done all we can for today, so let's get out of here. When we got back to my house, I asked Rhiannon to tell me what had happened with Melanie and Frank. She smiled smugly. I went over to where their food was spread out and tasted it, making complimentary remarks. Melanie was clearly unhappy with my presence, but there was little she could say. Then I told her how much I liked her outfit, and she was compelled to return compliment for compliment. This gave me the opportunity to tell her where I bought it. I realized she recognized the outfit and figured out how much the outfit must have cost. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were almost green with envy. That sounds like Melanie, I said. She's definitely into fashion and prides herself on her taste in clothes. Just about that time, Rhiannon continued. One of the other ladies asked Melanie to help her in the kitchen, and although she didn't feel like doing it, she had to leave me alone with Frank. As soon as she left, I went over and tried another sample of their dish. As she spoke, Rhiannon repeated her actions. I started to feel hot. She straightened up and grinned, clearly realizing the impression she had made on me. Once I got Frank's attention, I started flirting with him in earnest. I asked him if he played soccer, and that gave him a chance to show off a little. While he was doing that, I walked over and stroked his chest. I pointed out that he was much bigger than you, and I told him I liked big men. She giggled. I figured he'd do it right at the table. Wow, I said. No wonder Melanie was so hostile. I'm doing the best I can, she said with obvious false modesty. And I can't believe Frank would believe you're courting him, I added. She smiled derisively. Guys like Frank are so self-sufficient that it wouldn't occur to them to question a woman's interest. Ironically, they're usually the worst lovers. I grinned. If Rhiannon's words were true, it would serve Melanie well. I held out the envelope to her. Do you think we're ready for the next phase? I asked her. Asked her? Asked her? Definitely. The dance at your club will be perfect for what we have planned." Then she turned and headed for the front door. "What, no seduction attempts today?" I asked with a smile. She grinned over her shoulder. "I wouldn't have thought so." Then she turned and jerked her hips slightly, making my loins quiver. When she left, I opened a can of beer and sat down to ponder what had happened. On the one hand, I was very glad that the honey trap had worked. Even though Melanie didn't want me anymore, I knew she was none too pleased with how quickly I'd found someone to take her place, and even more upset that her replacement was so much hotter than Melanie would ever be. It was all very satisfying, but I couldn't shake the guilt I felt about Penny's situation. Maybe Rhiannon was right, I thought. Could I really have feelings for Penny? I had liked her from the very first time Melanie had introduced us. I found her attractive, slim, athletic, graceful, with an interesting, outgoing personality. But because of Melanie, I always tried to keep our relationship purely friendly and tennis-like. And I was sure that's what Penny wanted too, especially now that she was going through the loss of her husband. I thought about what Rhiannon had said about Penny. It couldn't be true, could it? If Penny was interested in me, why was she avoiding me like the plague? And why did it bother me so much? For that matter, why was I constantly turning down the sexiest woman I'd probably ever met in my life? Could my feelings for Penny have been part of it? Eventually, I gave up and went to bed. I didn't know the answers to my questions, and even if I did, I still wouldn't know what to do with them. I decided that the best thing for me to do was to stay the course, focusing on the plan I had developed. The annual spring dance at the club was a popular event that always drew a large crowd. The ladies used the dance as an excuse to dress up, and the men reluctantly donned tracksuits and some even wore ties. I was counting on Frank and Marlene to come. I had warned Rhiannon about what to expect from her, and I was curious to see what she would wear to put our plan into action tonight. So I was surprised and disappointed to see her get out of the car in jeans and a t-shirt. Granted, they were the tightest jeans I'd ever seen on a woman, and the t-shirt was obscenely tight, but I was still expecting something different. My face must have given me away because she stroked it as she walked past me. "You didn't think I'd jeopardize my dress by coming here, did you? Just let me use your bedroom for a little while and then I'll be ready to go." I was already wearing my sport coat and pants, so I waddled impatiently across the room while she dressed. "Damn," I grinned to myself. "It's like we're an old married couple." A few minutes later, her voice came to me. "Michael, can you come in here? I need your help with something." I walked back into the house and opened the bedroom door. My God, there stood Rhiannon in the sexiest lingerie I had ever seen. She turned to face me again. "Will I?" she asked with a slight smile. I couldn't resist and took a step toward her. But she stopped me with a smile and a raised hand. "No, no, not now. I can't afford to have you ruin everything. So now that I have your consent, get out of here and let me put my dress on." I think I staggered as I walked back to the den. A few minutes later, she came out. This time, she was wearing a strapless dress, the same whitish color as the trim on her underwear. The color contrasted beautifully with her hair. As she walked across the floor, I realized that the dress must have been tailored because the fabric seemed to flow down her limbs like water. With each step, I could clearly see the relief of her thighs, and when she turned, her buttocks curved out in crisp detail. The slit in the side of her dress reached all the way to the top of her stockings, and when she stood to the right, her perfect leg was on display. Of course, it didn't help that I knew exactly what she had under her dress either. I swallowed hard. "I think you might cause a few heart attacks tonight," I told her. And I wasn't kidding. She only smiled and held out her hand so I could lead her out the door. The club's patio was cleared out for dancing, and paper lanterns hung overhead. It was a little garish, but I liked the effect of the soft lights and tinkling music. Rhiannon slid into my arms to dance, and I wasn't surprised to find that she was a much better dancer than I was. As we moved together, she rested her head on my shoulder, and in that moment I decided that I didn't care that she was a working girl. I just enjoyed the feel of her body next to mine and the pleasure of her company. She lifted her head and pulled back far enough to look at me. "You know, this suburban life isn't so bad. A girl could get used to it." Before I could answer, she tensed. "Uh-oh, battle stations." I turned and saw Frank Calhoun heading our way, dragging a clearly reluctant Melanie behind him. "Hi, Rhiannon. Hi, Michael," he murmured. "Very glad you decided to join us this evening. How about we switch partners for a couple of dances?" When I agreed, he whirled Rhiannon away, leaving me and a clearly awkward Melanie standing still. I held out my hands to her. Would you like to dance for old time's sake? She reluctantly agreed, and when a new song came on, I started dancing with her. It was an interesting experience. I loved this woman and had been married to her for 10 years. But after everything that had happened, all that was left in me was a keen desire to make her feel what she had done to me. So was our marriage really that bad? I asked. I asked. I asked. She sighed. No, Michael, it wasn't like that at all. We had a few good years and some good times. But then things went downhill, and after a while I didn't feel very enthusiastic about our relationship anymore. And when Frank came along and made it so clear how much he wanted me, I just fell in love with him. I did fall in love, Michael. It was just like it was in college. She looked up at me. I didn't want to hurt you, Michael, but I had to do what was right for me. Can you understand that? I understand, I said bitterly. You decided to switch. That's not what I meant, she defended herself. That's okay, I said. I switched too. She made a grimace as she remembered who I was now dating, and I felt some satisfaction. If things went right from here on out, things would only get better from here on out. I looked up and saw Frank and Rhiannon walking toward us hand in hand. There goes your date back, Michael, Frank said with a slight smirk. Have a nice evening. Then he strode away, with Melanie struggling to catch up with him. Rhiannon and I continued to dance. How did it go? I whispered in her ear. You could almost hear the chuckle in her voice. Hooked, she replied. He's sure I've fallen for him. He'll make up some excuse for Melanie and we'll meet at the club after everyone leaves. I'm just a little nervous about the role. The timing has to be perfect, I told her. Leave it to me. Women know all about these things. Then she licked my ear and I flinched helplessly. As night fell, I noticed that the people were rapidly thinning. I must have been looking around because Rhiannon caught me. Sorry, Michael, she said. Looks like Penny didn't show up today. Am I really that transparent? I asked her. Like glass, she replied with a slight smile. As we walked back to my house, I reached into my pocket and held out another envelope to Rhiannon. I may not get a chance to give this to you later, I told her, and I wanted to make sure you get it normally. She took it, it seemed to me, almost reluctantly. For a moment she stared at me, and then her face changed. The sexy goddess had somehow disappeared, and all that was left was a real but still beautiful woman. This was the most unusual assignment I've ever gotten, she said, and you are unlike any client I've ever had. It was a little unpleasant at times, I blushed, but I enjoyed it immensely. I took both her hands in mine. When I decided to get my revenge, I knew I needed someone with outstanding qualities, I replied. But I didn't expect to find someone like you, and I'll never forget you. I pitched forward and kissed her on the lips. She held the kiss for a few seconds and then pulled away abruptly. She blinked her eyes rapidly a few times and then said hastily, No need to ruin your lipstick. She then glanced at the jewel-encrusted watch on her wrist and added, It's almost time we should get going. Give me exactly 30 minutes. With those words, she walked out the door, got into her car and drove away. I stood for a moment and then made a decision. Rhiannon and I hadn't talked about it, and I hoped I wouldn't screw it up, but I had to take a chance. I pulled out my cell phone. She must have recognized my number. Michael, why are you calling at this hour? Penny, I want to ask you for the biggest favor of my life. Please don't ask any questions. Just meet me at the club in 30 minutes. What's going on, Michael? What does all this mean? Please, Penny, I begged. I don't have time to explain. Please, just trust me. Just come back in 30 minutes. I'm sorry, I have to go. I hung up the phone. Heading towards the clubhouse, I wondered if she would come. The chance was slim, but I figured it was the only chance I had. When I got to the parking lot, there were 2 cars parked there. I pulled out my cell phone again and made another call. Frank? Melanie's angry voice came through the phone. Where are you? It's not Frank, I said. It's Michael. Michael, what do you want and why are you calling so late? She demanded. I'm calling because I know where Frank is. He's with Rhiannon. What? She shrieked. Where are they? Look, I said. Just meet me at the club as soon as possible. Then I hung up the phone. Frank's house was a few blocks from the club, but she must have run faster because I soon spotted her running through the backyard of someone's house. I intercepted her before she reached the club. Where is he? She raged. Be quiet, commanded I, grabbing her wrist. You have to be quiet so we can catch them. I led her to the door to the club, which was unlocked, and we tiptoed across the threshold. As we entered, there was a rustle and rustle of clothes. In the dim light coming through the windows, I saw Melanie's eyes widen. I quickly clamped a hand over her mouth to keep her quiet, then pointed to the light switch on the wall. She nodded in understanding, and we tiptoed over to it. I flicked the switch, and the room was instantly flooded with light. Frank tried to get up with a startled cry, but his pants caught on his knees and he stumbled and fell to the floor. He jumped to his feet again, frantically pulling up his pants. Behind him, Rhiannon rose from the couch on which she had been lying. Her dress was draped over the back of the couch. She stood, clad only in her outrageous underwear, and there was no doubt in anyone's mind what was going on. I had to restrain Melanie as she started yelling at Frank. You bastard, how could you do this to me? We were supposed to be married. Rhiannon clutched at Frank's arm, pressing herself against his back under the pressure of Melanie's anger. Now that he was wearing pants, Frank's confidence returned to him. He looked at me boldly and then turned to Rhiannon and asked, What do you want to do now, baby? Oh, Frank, she replied in a little girl's voice. I just want to be with you. As she clung tightly to him, he hugged her protectively. Then he turned to face us again. Despite Melanie's distress, his first words were directed to me. Well, Michael, it looks like you've lost another woman. I didn't utter a word, but Melanie exclaimed, What about us, Frank? What about us? The big man turned to her. Look, Melanie, we've been doing well for a while, but it won't last long. Now I've found someone better and I'm going to devote all my time to her. He looked back at Rhiannon, then turned to Melanie. Can't blame a guy for wanting to switch, right? Even in pain and anger, Melanie couldn't help but cast a guilty look at me upon hearing those words. Rhiannon turned and deftly put on her dress. Then she turned and put her arms around Frank's neck. He leaned over and kissed her. Come on, baby, let's get out of here, he said, pulling her toward the door. You go, Frank, she said. I have something to tell Michael. Besides, I don't want to leave my car here. Look, I'll meet you at this bar. She reached into her purse, pulled out a piece of paper, and hurriedly wrote the address. I'll be right there with you, honey, she added, stroking the front of his pants and bestowing a passionate kiss on him. He looked at her doubtfully. Are you sure you're going to be okay? He asked. I'm sure, darling. Michael won't hurt me. He's not that kind of guy. Yeah, Frank grinned. I guess you're right. With those words, he walked out the door and we heard him drive away. While our attention was on Frank, Melanie managed to break free of my grip. She screamed, You bitch! And lunged at Rhiannon with her claws out. Instead of flinching, Rhiannon calmly stood her ground. When Melanie caught up with her, Rhiannon took a quick step to the side, grabbed one of Melanie's outstretched arms, and deftly twisted it behind her back. She winked at me. I knew self-defense lessons would come in handy. When Melanie continued to resist, Rhiannon told her sharply, If you don't calm down, I'll be forced to dislocate your shoulder. Melanie stopped resisting and Rhiannon pushed her away to face her. Listen, Melanie, there are a few things you need to know, she said. I don't give a damn about your Neanderthal ex-fiancé, and I have absolutely no intention of joining him at the bar he's headed to. Melanie was stunned. But why? Why did I seduce him? Because that's my profession. I'm a paid escort. I've had dozens of guys like Frank. They all think they're God's gift to women and are always on the lookout for the next piece of ass. Do you think he loved you? The only thing he really loved was the opportunity to finally beat Michael at something. I'm sure he loved having sex with you, but he loved having sex with Michael even more. So Michael hired me to get a little revenge on Frank, and at the same time show you what it's like when a lover is unfaithful. It hurts, doesn't it? Melanie shrieked and lunged at me, but before I could react, a figure flashed in front of me and knocked Melanie to the floor. She stretched clumsily on the floor. Penny stood over her with clenched hands. You deserve it, Melanie. After what you did to Michael, you deserve so much more. Melanie just lay there, sobbing. It seemed to me that her feelings were hurt more than her body. Penny turned to face me and I could see tears streaming down her face. Is it really true? She asked. She's really not your girlfriend? No, I told her solemnly. She was my partner in the honey trap we set for Frank and Melanie, but nothing more. But she's so beautiful, Penny objected. I could never compete with someone like her. Rhiannon walked over and put her hands on Penny's shoulders. Silly girl, I'm the one who never stood a chance. He only had eyes for you. Penny looked at me again. So you never even… Rhiannon stepped in again. No, Penny, never. I could never distract him from thinking about you enough for him to touch me. And believe me, I gave him that opportunity. Penny said nothing, but looked at me with shining eyes. Rhiannon smirked at both of us. I think it's time for me to get out of here. I've had tougher assignments than this, but I've had enough of this. At that moment, Melanie picked herself up off the floor. What about me? Where am I supposed to go? I can't go back to Frank's house, not after what happened. Penny looked at her thoughtfully. I don't know what you're going to do tomorrow, but you can sleep at my house tonight. I'm going to drive home with Michael. With those words, she kissed me hard. I took her hand and decided not to let go. But something kept bugging me, and I turned to Rhiannon again. What about Frank? Where did you send him? She laughed. That was the address of a gay bar he knows. I wonder how long he'll be there before he realizes I'm not coming. Then the smile disappeared from her face and she looked at me intently. Good luck, Michael. You're a special person and I won't forget you. She leaned forward and kissed me gently. I felt Penny squeeze my hand even tighter. Rhiannon then turned to Penny, and her face took on a fierce expression. You will treat him right, do you understand me? If I ever hear that you don't, I'll be back. And this time I won't take no for an answer. The fierce expression left her face, replaced by an expression that I later realized was an expression of sadness. She reached out and stroked my cheek. But I don't think I'll be so lucky. Then she reached into her purse and slipped something into my hand. Goodbye, she said, and then turned and walked out the door, her hips swaying magnificently. I looked at my hand. There were 4 unopened envelopes in it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.